Imagine your brain as a massive stone structure, precariously balancing on a narrow fulcrum. New information forces it to shift to keep from collapsing. Reading a text in a second language puts exactly this kind of intense, dual-process strain on a learner. The brain is forced to perform two heavy cognitive tasks simultaneously. First is top-down processing, drawing on cultural background to grasp context. Second is bottom-up processing, decoding vocabulary word by word. The system breaks down at the language acquisition bottleneck. If an unrecognized word halts the bottom-up stream and top-down lacks context to compensate, the entire system jams. In a typical classroom with students of varying English proficiencies, this jam happens constantly. Students encountering texts without the necessary background schema or vocabulary quickly become overwhelmed, leading to passivity, frustration, and disengagement from the material. When weaker students abandon a reading assignment, they aren't necessarily failing due to a lack of effort. They are experiencing a structural failure caused by an instructional model that expects a single mind to bear an overwhelming cognitive load alone. To see how this problem operates in reality, we can look at a private technological institute in Bangkok, Thailand. Instructors there faced classes with sharp divides in English proficiency and needed a way to bypass this constant cognitive overload. The researchers leading the study posed an interesting question. What if a classroom filled with mixed proficiency readers is actually an untapped instructional asset? Their proposed intervention required abandoning the traditional practice of assigning reading as a solitary task. Instead, they organized the students into small collaborative reading notes. By grouping 2 to 5 students together, this new architecture distributes the heavy top-down and bottom-up processing demands across multiple minds simultaneously, rather than forcing one student to do all the heavy lifting. While distributing cognitive load sounds highly efficient in theory, the researchers had to measure whether the students actually recognized this benefit and actively utilized the distributed network. The findings suggest that collaborative reading functions as a structural intervention, changing the mechanics of language acquisition within the classroom. The immediate question any educator asks about group work is whether it actually improves comprehension or if students simply prefer talking to their friends over doing solitary academic work. The data table answers this. Quantitative results show students reported very high agreement that collaborative reading provided academic benefits, scoring 4.32 overall. Specifically, item 6 earned a 4.47. Group reading enabled knowledge sharing. True knowledge transfer occurred, not just copying. This high rate of academic success is driven by a mechanism outlined in Vygotsky's socio-cultural theory. It argues that cognitive development relies heavily on social interaction and peer scaffolding. Here is how scaffolding operates. A high-proficiency student decodes complex vocabulary and syntax, fulfilling the group's bottom-up processing requirement. Then, a lower proficiency student provides real-world knowledge that illuminates the sentence's context, supplying the missing top-down schema. Through this co-constructed dialogue, the group collectively parses the text and achieves a depth of comprehension that neither student could have reached independently. While academic metrics are critical, the study's second dataset focused on the intervention's social impact. The social benefit scores averaged 4.35, higher than the academic performance. The metrics driving this are crucial. Item 13 on members assisting each other, and item 20 on active participation tied for the study's highest scores at 4.50. This high level of peer support addresses a major psychological hurdle in second language acquisition, known as the affective filter. When a student attempts to read or speak in a foreign language in a solitary, high-stakes environment, they often experience a fear of making mistakes, looking foolish, or being judged by their instructor. This anxiety raises their affective filter, which blocks language input from being acquired by the brain. Working in collaborative nodes systematically dismantles this barrier. The trust and camaraderie built between peers lower the affective filter, creating a safe, low-stakes environment for students to test hypotheses and negotiate meanings. High social metrics in a classroom are a mandatory psychological catalyst. They enable the vulnerability and risk-taking required for language learning to take place. However, the collaborative model is not flawless. Looking back at the first data table, the lowest scoring academic metric was item 3, which asks if group reading is crucial in the classroom. It earned a 4.10, indicating a degree of friction. That friction stems from practical realities. Students naturally read at different speeds. Without guidance, high proficiency students often finish quickly, and they unintentionally dominate the subsequent group discussions. There are also cultural barriers. Students from varied backgrounds hold different attitudes toward group work, and lower proficiency readers may retreat into passivity to avoid slowing down their peers. Instructors observed exactly this behavior. Left to their own devices, groups devolved into silent units, staring at their phones to translate, ignoring their peers entirely. The structural solution to this friction involves engineering what researchers call positive interdependence. This is achieved by enforcing strict role assignments within the group. Assigning a discussion leader creates an internal regulator. This student manages the reading's pacing and prompts quieter students. The roles of note-taker and summarizer ensure every member has a specific deliverable, enforcing individual accountability and making passivity impossible. Collaborative reading fails if it is treated merely as putting desks together. It requires carefully engineered role play to force equal participation and actively overcome disparities in proficiency. When these collaborative nodes are deployed and sustained over a full academic semester, the effects begin to compound well outside the boundaries of vocabulary and syntax. The research frames this long-term compounding effect as sustainable education, the development of the critical thinking and teamwork skills necessary for global engagement and complex future challenges. By examining the mechanics of the group node at a macro level, we can map exactly how linguistic tasks translate into these broader competencies. The simple act of negotiating the meaning of a dense academic text forces students to identify missing information, propose hypotheses, and test them against the context, a direct simulation of complex problem-solving. Managing the dynamics of their peers and synthesizing diverse viewpoints directly trains students in cross-cultural communication and conflict resolution. The instructors noted that students from completely different academic faculties were able to unite, delegate specific tasks based on their assigned roles, and execute their assignments on a strict deadline. Under this model, the foreign language classroom acts as a disguised incubator. It is teaching the interdisciplinary survival skills required by modern global industries. Treating second language reading as an isolated, internalized struggle guarantees a high rate of failure. It places an unsustainable cognitive load on a single learner and relies heavily on their pre-existing knowledge. Collaborative environments bypass these bottlenecks by leveraging peer-to-peer scaffolding and mutual trust to distribute the effort. It takes a room full of isolated individuals and wires them into a functioning collective, capable of working together to decode complex information. For modern educators, the primary instructional goal can no longer be restricted to simply getting a student to parse a paragraph correctly. Instructors must design reading environments that deliberately simulate the collaborative, multifaceted challenges of the real world. Collaborative reading provides the structure to do exactly that, acting as a bridge between language acquisition and global engagement.